Did you ever feel like something was watching you? It happened to me a few weeks ago and I still can't explain it. I live alone in a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. Most of the time it's quiet and peaceful. But sometimes, when I walk past the mirrors, I feel like something's off, like someone's watching me through them. One night I was brushing my teeth before bed. The apartment was dark, with only the soft glow of the bathroom light spilling out into the hallway. As I looked into the mirror above the sink, I saw my reflection staring back at me. Just me. But then, something happened. I blinked, and for a split second my reflection didn't blink, it just stood there still cold, as if it were watching me. My stomach dropped and I quickly looked away, my heart racing. I tried to brush it off. It had to be nothing. But when I glanced back at the mirror, my reflection was off. It was too still, like it was waiting for something. My heart started pounding. Then I looked again, and my reflection? It smiled, but it wasn't my smile. It was wide, empty, cold, like something else was in the mirror instead of me. I stumbled back and ran out of the bathroom. I didn't look in the mirror again that night. But that feeling, that wrongness, stayed with me. The next day I looked again. My reflection was normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I don't know if it was a trick of the light or if something else is hiding in the reflection, but I can't look in a mirror the same way again. If you enjoyed that story and want to hear more terrifying tales like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out, more chilling stories are on the way. Now let's move on to the next story. A few months ago, I moved into an old apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The building was cheap and a little run down, but I didn't mind. It was my first place on my own, and despite the creaky floors and thin walls, it felt like a fresh start. First, nothing seemed unusual. But then one evening I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard footsteps outside my door. At first I thought it was just the building settling, or maybe someone walking by, but then the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I tried to ignore it, but I heard faint tapping, like something was being dragged across the floor. I stood up, my heart beginning to race, and listened. The sounds were so distinct, like someone was pacing just on the other side of my door, slowly walking back and forth. I hesitated but opened the door, expecting to find a neighbor or someone wandering the hall. But the hallway was empty. There was no one there. I stepped out, checked both ends of the hall. Nothing. It was silent, too silent, and I could feel a chill in the air. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to brush it off. But the next night, the footsteps returned. Closer this time, almost as if they were right outside my door. I went to open it, but then I froze. I noticed something. There was a faint shadow standing at the far end of the hall. A woman. Her figure barely visible, as if she was standing in the shadows looking at the floor. I called out, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, motionless. I hesitated, then took a step forward, but as soon as I moved, she turned and walked down the hall, her footsteps fading as she disappeared around the corner. The next day, I asked the building superintendent about it. Her face went pale as she spoke. "You're not the first to see her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A long time ago, a woman lived here. She disappeared. Some say she was never at peace. People think her spirit still roams the hallways, lost and searching." I didn't know what to think, but that night the footsteps returned. I tried to ignore it, but now every time I passed the hallway, I could feel her presence. It was a few years ago when I moved into an older apartment. It was a cozy place, nothing too fancy, but it had its charm. The building was a bit run down, but it was cheap, so I didn't mind. It was one of those places that had an old, musty smell, and the floors creaked under your feet. But the biggest issue was the mirrors. There was one in the hallway, one in the living room, and a large one in the bedroom. I never thought much of them until I started noticing something strange. It all began late one night when I was getting ready for bed. I walked past the bedroom mirror and caught a glimpse of someone standing behind me. It startled me. I turned around quickly, but no one was there. I thought maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, it had been a long day and I was tired, but then it started happening more frequently. The next few nights, I'd see the figure in the mirror again. It was always just a glimpse, something fleeting. It was as if someone was standing behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I even checked the apartment, convinced that someone was sneaking around, but I never found anything. One night, I decided to stay up a little later than usual, hoping to catch whatever was going on. I sat in the living room, facing the hallway, mirror, and watched it. That's when it happened. I saw the figure again. This time I could make out the details. A tall man in a dark coat. He was standing in the hallway right behind me in the reflection. I froze, my heart racing. I turned around slowly, but there was no one there. I ran to the hallway, checked every corner, but the apartment was empty. No signs of anyone. It was as if the man had vanished into thin air. Over the next few days, I started getting a sense of being watched. The feeling would come and go, but it was always there when I looked at the mirrors. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was all in my head, but it was hard to ignore the way the air felt thick and cold whenever I was near them. One afternoon, I mentioned it to the building superintendent, thinking he might laugh it off, but instead, he gave me a look, almost like he was expecting me to say something like that. "You're not the first to see him," he said, his voice low. "People say there's a man who used to live here. He disappeared years ago, never found. Some folks think his spirit still hangs around." I didn't know what to make of it. Was I seeing things? Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was there something else in the apartment? I moved out a few months later, not because of the man in the mirror, but because I found a place closer to work. But every now and then, when I'm alone in a room with a mirror, I can't help but feel like I'm being watched, and I can never quite shake the image of that tall man standing behind me just out of sight.